Pokemon's heavy RNG influence is often claimed to be a good thing, actually. So claims many a player not swayed by the heat of battle, a sentiment which mysteriously disappears when the dice doesn't roll their way, and they get crit, paralyzed, full paralyzed on the first Thunderbolt of the game, etc. Then they are chastised by a player on the sidelines for not packing a faster Pokemon or an electric immunity as their anti-Thunderbolt response, thus meaning they were asking for the RNG. This player on the sidelines will then perpetuate the cycle in their battle and wonder why those watching their game do not see how unbelievably unfair the game is to them in particular. Such irrational, melodramatic meltdowns hypocritically clashing with pretensions towards cool-headed logic are a foundational aspect of the competitive Pokemon experience. We ourselves take pride in the fact that we don't make fair-weather excuses for RNG. As far as we're concerned, most of it is nonsense we'd be better off without. Not all aspects of RNG are equally deserving of our wrath, of course. Today, we've gathered the moves that, both via our opinion and general consensus, most merit a response the blood-boiling urge to find their code in the game and send it to the bottom of the Pacific. So with the exceptions of evasion and one-hit KO moves, which are so clearly ridiculous that they receive clauses banning them in singles, join us as we find catharsis in burning out our venomous feelings on the most hated RNG moves of all time. But before we start, once again, this video is sponsored by Raycon. Fall is here, and that means Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals from the best in the high-quality audio business. Look, everyday tasks can be super tedious. Make them more seamless by listening to audio while doing these tasks. I use the everyday earbuds literally every day for many tasks. I use them while I wash dishes and cook. I use them while I edit, and of course, I use them while exercising. One of the best features of the new everyday earbuds is that they're sweat resistant, so I don't have to worry when I use them to listen to music or audiobooks while I exercise. And speaking of audiobooks, I listen to a ton of them while I do tasks. It's how I absorb knowledge while I have to do chores. I'm always hustling, be it with content or working on other ventures, so I want to absorb as much knowledge as possible. In fact, I listen to so much stuff that you'd think I'd run out of earbud battery quickly. But luckily, yet another one of my favorite features of Raycon, its battery life, comes in handy here because it has a whopping 32-hour battery life, and it's got a quick charge function. 10 minutes of charging gives me 90 minutes of battery. And of course, it's always been a pain to connect to other wireless Bluetooth devices to multiple devices. But luckily with Raycon, I can simply connect them to 2 devices at once. So if you want earbuds that are already half the price of other wireless earbuds and also support the channel to help us produce more content, go to buyraycon.com/FSG to get up to 30% off site-wide. And thank you so much to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Speaking of burning, we're starting off with the stingent degeneracy that is Scald. Ever since Generation 5, this move has caused ire one would think more befitting the failures of international relations. Yet when experienced firsthand, such furious outbursts seem not just understandable, but necessary, in the hopes of causing a change. Even if nothing happens, it is better to have tried, no matter how many others may mock you for trying to better things through yapping, because it is far better than what they would have you do, which is sit and suffer in silence. Suffice to say, Scald has caused a lot of yapping over the years. What makes Scald so powerful? Isn't it just another variant of Lava Plume, Discharge, Sludge Bomb, and Body Slam? 80 base power, 30% secondary status effect. Why, we're glad you asked. Scald is uniquely overbearing because number 1, its status effect is super effective against the type that is immune to it. You can block Lava Plume burns with the fires that resist it, Discharge paralysis with grounds and electrics, Sludge Bomb poison with poisons and steels. The problem with Scald is that the one type immune to burns is actually going to be getting chased out by the Scald users. Forget switching in. This brings up to point number 2, which is that Scald is a stab move given to water types, which means that there are a lot of viable top tier Scald users out there, far more than the users of the other moves. And what's particularly pernicious is that waters with their famously excellent defensive profiles get a lot of opportunities to hit the field and spam Scald. When you consider this in conjunction with the fact that the odds to burn one out of a mere 2 Scalds is already 51%, that's right, you're the lucky one if neither of the 2 burn you. Then you see how Scald gets out of hand. But are burns really that bad though, you ask? Especially Gen 7 and on, where the damage per turn is 6.25% instead of its previous 12.5. Oh, they're more manageable, sure, but dealing with them is still a massive hindrance for many Pokemon, especially thanks to the RNG, meaning one must fall back on a few specific choices for it. What this often means in practice is that you see 2 waters, Toxapex, Slow Twins, Alomomola, and what have you, scalding each other until something happens. What of other anti-Scald Scald options like Magic Guard and Poison Heal though. They are limited and not guaranteed to work against certain Scald users. Have fun using Clefable and Gliscor to take on Keldeo or Manaphy, for example. What about Water Absorb or Storm Drain? Also far from safe into these threats, to say nothing of how the likes of Gastrodon hates the Toxic so commonly carried by Scald users. It's not just Scald in a vacuum after all. Plus, these water immunities like Gastro and Seismitoad run Scald themselves. Finally, Lunberry is to prevent Scald as counterplay, as it's almost useless to actually deal with the issue of switching into Scald. Scald is so absurd that you see moves like Toxapex staying in a Landier, Styrian, or Garchomp for instance, willing to take that monstrous Earthquake so they can try and get a Scald burn off. This is the common theme among these RNG moves. They are often used as a catch-all quote-unquote counter to everything. Should the dice roll your way, even if it's unfavorable, just go for it and say, oh well, it didn't work out if you don't get the percentage more than twice as likely to not work, rather than to try and figure out a more reliable answer. The issue though is that these moves are high enough percentage to work a significant enough percentage of the time, even if they aren't the best move, and their effect is so crippling. And this is extremely true for the Scald everything mentality of those whose counter to everything is to burn them. Another factor to consider, Lava Plume Heatran could just as easily Will-O-Wisp if they really wanted to inflict burns, and so on for the others. Most waters cannot burn without Scald. The exceptions, Volcanion, whose Mega Scald of sorts, Steam Eruption, is a fierce move but only has 8 PP, and imperfect accuracy to boot, while coming from a Pokemon with a Stealth Rock weakness and no reliable recovery. Rotowash and Jellicent can burn too, but they have to do so with Will-O-Wisp, not gamble with Scald. Jellicent can and often does Scald as well, of course, but if you have it in facing something and must burn immediately, you're going with Wisp. Another water would have to take the Scald gamble. The core of any RNG move is, of course, the power of the effect and the percentage of its activation, and this becomes a problem when the effect is disproportionately powerful and rewarded too often. You can mindlessly spam the move and be rewarded. Hell, you can make a move that is worse than another at your disposal and get bailed out anyway. Here's a classic cross-generational example. You've got a water type against Ferrothorn. Should you go to the Ferrothorn counter you surely have on your competently built team? You could, sure, or you could just hope that Scald burns, even though not getting the burn means you're giving Ferrothorn a free turn at best and risking getting destroyed by Power Whip at worst. We're sure this will inspire a response in some that Ferrothorn would be broken in a Scaldless world, and make no mistake, that is unbelievably stupid. If Scald's RNG is the only thing standing between Ferrothorn and brokenness, Ferrothorn is almost surely Uber anyway. Nobody competent will actually make that argument, we hope. And if dice rolling is the most reasonable way you can conceive to contain something as excellent yet exploitable as Ferrothorn, then you need to get good. There's also the fact that Scald rewards overly safe play. Let's say you have the water out on the field against something you scare out. In this instance, Keldeo against Heatran. If you had a Surf Keldeo, you wouldn't always want to attack the Heatran because Latios or Mega Venusaur could switch in and shrug the attack off effortlessly, then pressure your switch in with ease. So you might want to predict, either you have to use a different move with Keldeo to hit the switch harder, or you pull a double switch to match up better against the answer. You run the risk of Heatran staying in and punishing you, but you put your confidence in your skill that it won't for X reason. Let's say because it's needed to check the Mega Scizor you have in the back. With Scald though, you just click Scald and have a good chance to win either way. If Heatran stays in, it gets obliterated, and if Latios or Mega Venusaur come in, they have a good chance of getting ruined by burn. Obviously, Pokemon is full of occurrences where someone plays safely, passively, or outright worse and gets saved by dice rolls, but seeing as we try to make a competitive game out of this Arceus Forsaken mess we're given, just because we cannot get rid of all of it does not mean we should tolerate the more extreme instances of it, or that we shouldn't attempt to limit it. Anyone who believes that we should is free to put their money where their mouth is and campaign for the unbanning of one-hit KO moves if you like playing in such utter chaos. No, we are not saying Scald is the same as a one-hit KO move, but then again, Solgaleo isn't as broken as Groudon, yet it is also banned. The deal with it line of thinking is the same cop-out used to argue against everything broken. Of course, a good player will be prepared for Scald in the same way they'd be prepared for Genesect or whatever broken Pokemon plaguing OU. This isn't an argument against its brokenness. Overall, Scald has been driving players absolutely insane ever since it was first introduced as boiling water in early Generation 5. Sneasler is a major threat even without the help of one of the most mind-boggling moves Game Freak ever committed to code. In fact, its ban from singles largely hinged on the ease of sweeping with its unburdened set. However, rest assured, Dire Claw is absolutely bonkers, and if it wasn't for the overwhelming monstrosity that was unburdened, it would have received more attention, as it was quite universally agreed that Dire Claw was incredibly problematic in its own right. Oh, and it doesn't settle for singles either. Sneasler has in fact become arguably the most detested Pokemon in VGC, challenging or even eclipsing the mighty Incineroar itself. But what is so nuts about Dire Claw? Well, considering what might be thought of as its cousin, Effect Spore. If you make contact with an Effect Spore Pokemon, there's a 30% chance you'll get status for your troubles, either paralyzed, poison, or slept. Dire Claw is the same concept, but as an 80 base power physical poison move. Alternatively, you can think of it like a much better Tri-Attack with sleep instead of Tri-Attack's freeze, and the odds higher than Tri-Attack's 20%. Okay, cool. It's like Poison Jab with the extra benefit of paralysis or sleep instead of poison. Yeah, you can see how that might be a bit much, right? Oh, but it gets better. You see, Dire Claw's proc rate is actually 50%. Yikes. So you switch into this beast, and status is probably coming your way. Para and poison are bad enough, but when you include the most debilitating of all, sleep, things get really nasty. Switch their Sneasler answer in and get slept, and odds are it's not much of a Sneasler answer anymore, which is bad news considering how much it rips through with its huge attack speed and move pool. Resisting Dire Claw won't help much against the status assault. It's Scald-like in this sense because poison types immune to poison still have to contend with paralysis or sleep, and the only Pokemon with typing immune to poison moves outright, Steel types, do not want to come anywhere near Sneasler's base 130 attack stab close combat. Ah, but what about Golden Go? Immune to both stabs. Well, that's what Sneasler's Throat Chop is for. And that's still not all. Sneasler's also capable of running the Poison Touch ability, which gives all of its contact moves a 30% chance to poison. This thing ruins you with status just for spamming its attacks like it already wants to, hindering your already limited ability to take it on even further. In singles and VGC alike, it blasts through opponents with its offensive threat already. In VGC, it's similar to fellow Meta Destroyer Urshifu, but Dire Claw's dice rolls make it even more absurd to deal with. For a long time, full paralysis wasn't so actively bemoaned. It was more an irritating side occurrence because players weren't playing for full paralysis, more often than not. Sure, you had paraspam teams that compounded the immobility effect with others like Ironhead, Jirachi, and Dynamic Punch Machamp, but those were generally unreliable because they placed too much of the outcome in pure RNG, however favorable it might be. Generally, if something was spamming paralysis way back when, it was doing it to slow the opponent down first and foremost. For instance, if you paralyze a Heatran, it can no longer outspeed and check your Swords Dance superpower Scizor. However, eventually players discovered the power of what came to be known as Yellow Magic. You know how Scald is overbearing with its 30% proc rate? Well, the 25% of full paralysis is right behind it, and the effect of a free turn is far more brutal. Suddenly, a vast majority of the player bases adopted Thunder Wave as their answer to everything, not in terms of slowing it down, but in terms of looking for the full paralysis, even against slow Pokemon like Skarmory. This was a known tactic back in the lower power days of RBY and GSC, but now morphed into something far more pernicious. Rather than opportunistically wait for a key full para to kick in, as was used in those gens, players were simply hoping for a full para much in the same way they hoped for Scald Burns, without regard for the possibility of a better move. The odds were high enough that they were rewarded quite often. Of course, paralysis became more actively used as well. Players began spamming Substitute in front of paralyzed Pokemon with greater zeal, even on non-para spam teams, whereas previously, this would be frowned upon for needlessly risking the healthy losses to create the sub. Now it was encouraged given how high the odds were when you just needed one. Speaking of paraspam, the distinction between paraspam and non-paraspam was blurred. Previously, non-paraspam teams could still use Thunder Waves, of course, or even something like Discharge on Zapdos over Thunderbolt, but now paralysis was so overwhelmingly present and full para so actively fished for that it felt like every other team was a paraspam team. This isn't to say that teams didn't still paralyze opponents for the benefits of slower teammates like Mega Heracross, because they did, but the game just got so much easier when you could paralyze so much of the opposing team, especially since ground and electric types weren't necessarily going to be able to ward off many Thunder Wavers such as Clefable. Additionally, the fact that so many top tier Pokemon like Ferrothorn obtained the move made it downright effortless less to spam. We focus mostly on T-Wave because it's largely been synonymous with paralysis. You don't see many post RBY body slams outside of Jirachi, which of course can also T-Wave, but we must also mention Glare, which took off thanks to Superior and Zygarde, who spammed the move without fear of being blocked by Grounds at all. Not that Grounds would want to risk Superior's Leaf Storm anyway, but you couldn't even pivot around it like you could with a Scarf Lander Styrian against Thunderwave, for example. Superior and Zygarde spammed Glare and abused the daylights out of paralysis to the point where the latter was banned and the former became one of the most infuriating Pokemon in the game. It was already great without Glare, but with Para in the mix, hiding behind subs and boosting itself with contrary Leaf Storms, it was downright ridiculous. It could regularly muscle its way through checks like Tornado Steering with Para. Hell, even several variants of Heatran weren't safe should it drop low enough. Paralysis was called the best status in the game by several top players, and when you consider how impactful free turns are in a game where every turn is critical, it's easy to see why. Just as easy as it is to see how infuriating it is when those free turns kick up through luck and make you question if that so-called 25% is really programmed properly. Speaking of free turns, Confusion might not seem as deadly since it goes away once you switch out, but the upside is that the chance to not do anything is a whopping 50%, and to add insult to injury, in addition to not doing anything, you actually damage yourself. Not every source of Confusion is particularly effective though. You don't see much in the way of Confuse Ray, for instance. The more reliable Confusion inducers lay bare just how volatile it can be when distributed consistently. We'll start with Swagger, which took off in Generation 6 in singles and VGC alike. The Swag Play strategy, or the combination of Swagger and Foul Play, quickly exploded early in Generation 6, featured on prankster Pokemon like Thundurus and Klefki, which also bolstered the strat with Thunderwave. Swagger's attack boosting would increase the damage a Pokemon did to itself with Confusion, and was abusable with Foul Play, which got stronger the higher the opponent's attack. Swaggering the opponent was pure dice rolling. Not only did you click it against everything, you also did so risking greater damage to yourself when using it against physical attackers. As such, Swagger found itself banned from OU quite quickly, but no such recourse existed for the VGC player base, which found itself utterly dominated by Thundurus' swaggering antics, and it wasn't just Gen 6 either, already making waves in its brutal display in Gen 5 at 2013 Worlds. Even if the game didn't go your way, it was a great sort of a Hail Mary tactic because worst case, praying for Confusion is pretty good odds. This kind of catch-all was why it was so detested. It almost didn't even matter what happened before, it just come down to whether or not you could break through Confusion. Indeed, Swagger is God. Swagger wasn't the only villainous vector of confusion though. Most famously in DPP, Machamp's Can't Miss auto-confused Dynamic Punch allowed it to blast its way through many a Pokemon it would have no business beating otherwise. It was often the move to click Dynamic Punch even into targets that resisted it, simply to get the confusion on them. Payback ensured one couldn't feel particularly safe with the DP immune Ghost, Rotom Appliance, and Gengar, and everything else was vulnerable to getting beaten down with confusion, especially in conjunction with Machamp's favorite support, the aforementioned Paralysis. The strategy became among Diamond and Pearl's most despised, with more recent times even clamoring for the removal of Dynamic Punch, given its encouragement of dumbed down play. When the percentage is so high that your move is usually to simply mash Dynamic Punch into every resist in front of you, from Gyarados to Zapdos, and it'll succeed whether or not it's your best move, and it being your best move is a result from the percentage being so obnoxiously high, the strategy came by its detestable nature, honestly. Dynamic Punch's capacity to miss was seen plenty in GSC too, as one of the few of the limited methods to try and break past Snorlax. Unreliable, sure, but if you had multiple chances to use the move, you could give yourself some decent odds. Still, as with every RNG aspect of Pokemon, some players were encouraged to simply go fishing ahead of everything else. Some even tried Dynamic Punch Jirachi in advance and had the hubris to click the move riskily against Tyranitar on turn 1. The final detested confusion dealer was Hurricane. Now, this move was definitely the least guilty for several reasons. One, it was not used solely to deal confusion in the way Machamp opted for Dynamic Punch over the stronger close combat. It was used because it was the best special flying stab option for its users. Most famously, the Tornado Styrian that was such a staple. 2, its 70% accuracy outside of rain, which was almost always the case after Gen 5, meant that you had to hit it in the first place, then get a 30% confusion proc, then get the 50% self-hit on the opponent. Hurricane was so famously unreliable, some players used Air Slash instead, and when Bleak Wind Storm came around, the switch to that was instantaneous. And yet Hurricane was the standard, and so it had its fair share of goofy moments. The upside was that since the odds weren't exactly great, one wasn't usually gunning for confusion, with exceptions being repeated hurricanes against something not instantly threatening like a Fable. It was more the accidental confusions that were annoying about Hurricane. You've pivoted your choice band Tyranitar into a Hurricane, you're ready to pursuit that Torrent's lights out. Oops, it confused you, and now the Torrent escapes unscathed. The accuracy woes added to the general chaos, fitting for the status named Confusion. Before we move on to our final guess of Dishonor, we have some dishonorable mentions. First, Toxic, Will-O-Wisp, and Leech Seed. These are not inaccurate moves, especially after Will-O-Wisp's accuracy buff from 75 to 85 in Gen 6, but they are very impactful. So on the occasion they do miss, it feels particularly biting. If you miss, say, Fire Blast against a Tyranitar, it probably doesn't really matter. But missing a Leech Seed against it is far more impactful and sets you back greatly. Next, moves that freeze. These are low percentage side effects of moves used as offensive weapons, but they are also spammed repeatedly in hopes of catching that game-breaking 10%. Not just in Gen 1 either, as in more recent times, Karam spammed the daylights out of Freeze Dry to ruinous effect. We have Freeze Claws for a reason. In a similar vein, Sleep moves. We don't have them as RNG in the same way as we do these others, but Sleep Duration is RNG, and given the power of free turns, a long sleep can be utterly devastating, hence the frustration, and Sleep Claws for that matter. In VGC, where evasion moves aren't banned, Minimize has been spammed in many forms. Chansey combined Cheese with abusing the timer, while nowadays Alolan Muck spams Minimize alongside Moody Smeargle, which upon fainting will gift Alolan Muck its boost through Alolan Muck's power of alchemy ability, and then Flamigo comes in and uses its Co-Star ability to copy all of Alolan Muck's boosts. Then in Advanced OU, many a game has been saved to the great chagrin of the victim by a crucial flinch from a Choice Band Aerodactyl or Dragon Dance Tyranitar's Rock Slide. Finally in RBY, there's nothing more heartbreaking than a Tauros crit Hyper Beam. One of the most famously reviled Pokemon of all time. At least Shaman Sky got sent to Ubers for its flinch-happy antics. No such luck with Jirachi. Since Pokemon Platinum, it has been wielding its Steel Stab that has nary a case for your Steel Resist. Even Quadruple Resist will get worn down without leftovers, for Jirachi will simply spam the move more repeatedly, in defiance of its 60% success rate. Hypnosis always seems to miss, yet Jirachi always seems to flinch. Protests and demands for its removal have been around for a decade and a half at this point, especially with how nasty it gets when compounded with the paralysis Jirachi so effortlessly doles out itself, while also ensuring the opponent is slower as required for the flinch. Jirachi's Iron Head is the ultimate example of an RNG playstyle that bypasses all else. Forget any other considerations, other moves you might make. Even if they're a safer place to make, the odds are actually in your favor on each turn, so you can go ahead and Iron Head your way to success. Togekiss isn't the same. Sure, it can have some nasty stuff happen on occasion, but its typing leaves it much less consistent than Jirachi's incredible Steel Psychic combo. You don't have to think much with Jirachi. Yeah, you can do the bare minimum of softening opponents up first, but at the end of the day, you simply flinch whatever's in front of you. Even if your Steel Resist is, say, 4 or 5 hit KO'd by Iron Head, it's not enough. Jirachi so regularly chains together so many flinches that you need to be far sturdier against it, combining Steel Resist with longevity. Jirachi's ironically named Serene Grace leaves its Iron Head as well and truly the most hated RNG move out there, countering it as often a form of praying to the Pokegods that wouldn't just mow through your answer. Heatran who? And that's it. We're just scratching the tip of the surface here, of course. Pokemon is so rife with RNG, we could have easily made this video even longer or a multi-parter, just focusing on any of the moves we selected here, let alone all of them. Plus, there are many more that we could have picked. Let us know what you think of our choices, agree, disagree, whatever. We want to hear it. And also let us know what you'd like to see next time, should we return to the subject. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Dr. Mint, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Lord of the Rabbit, Pretzel SP, Ray, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, and Quetzalcoatl Northropi for their major support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.